It's now been about 7 months since Pokémon Legends ZA launched. I've so far made 3 videos on the game since it launched, and today I'm finally adding to that number. While at first people seem very happy and excited about the game, in recent months I've seen a lot more criticism of it, to a point where people say that they think that this is the worst game in the series, and that they hate it. While I think that the game has its fair share of reasonable criticism, hating it feels a bit strong, and saying it's the worst game in the series, I strongly disagree. So today I want to take a look at this game, and especially the hate around it, give my thoughts, and then give a bit more of a positive spin to Pokémon Legends ZA. Maybe it'll help you see it differently. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing that we need to do is find out where all of this criticism has come from in the first place. Well, obviously it stems from the fans, but why? What are these critiques? Are they reasonable or not? The first critique I've often seen is the Lumiose City setting. If you've watched my review of ZA from back in December, you'll know that I actually agree with this critique. The city skyline got quite dull after a while. The limited space compared to other games within the series such as SaturnUmbreon and Legends Arceus was disappointing to be sure as well, and Lumiose having very little to do was unfortunate too. But is it enough to say that they're the worst games in the series? Personally, I don't think so. I was very critical of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet's map as well, with Paldea feeling quite small and very dull, with very few areas that made you feel excited to explore, though that is partially the fault of how much emphasis they put on the legendary bikes. I also had very similar criticisms of Legends Arceus maps. While they are bigger and more varied than Lumiose, they still suffer from many of the same problems as ZA, that being how repetitive they are, how bored I got of them after a while, and how the Pokémon all appearing in the same place makes them feel less random and overall more dull. I could go on, with maps being one of Pokemon's biggest critical points since the move to the Switch. Is ZA's the worst of them all? I'm actually going to say no to that. I think Lumiose, while quite boring, actually does have some redeeming qualities. The verticality of the map is great. Lumiose is by far the map I've explored the most when it comes to elevation and rooftops. I think that it was a great addition that really helps this game feel less dull. You also have the lush greenery and different wild zones. While they could be a lot better, and believe me we'll be coming back to wild zones as they currently stand, they could be a damn sight worse with far less ecological diversity. Wild Zone 12 freezes over, becoming a permanent snowscape. Wild Zone 8 has a sandy floor for Pokemon that live in the desert. And Wild Zone 9 is an electrical plant, which is really interesting. I personally think maps like Sword and Shield's Wild Area are far worse than what we got in Lumiose. But let's talk about those Wild Zones. Wild Zones are little pockets of Lumiose City that are specifically designed to house Pokemon and be environments for them to live in. There's a lot of criticism for these areas, much of which I think is pretty valid. Wild Zones aren't what Quasartico Inc. claims them to be. In promotional material, Lumiose was supposed to be redeveloped to a point where people and Pokemon can live in natural harmony. But the Wild Zones are sort of contrary to that. They're gated off areas which most Pokemon live in, usually being areas created for people that have simply been repurposed for wild Pokemon. Though not many have actually been changed. Personally, I'd have Lumiose have a much richer biodiversity built into the city, almost being a bit of a mashup of cities' environments from across Kalos, a wintry area inspired by Snowbell City, a marshy area based on Route 19, a desert, a coastal area, a flower garden, etc. Something similar to what I outlined back in June 2024 when I first talked about Pokemon biodiversity in Lumiose. But we don't have that version of ZA. But is what we have that bad? Well, that depends. I would personally argue that while not ideal, many of the wild zones are interesting enough that they create some interesting habitats for wild Pokemon. One of the bigger issues for me is an issue that persisted from Legends Arceus, that being just how many Pokemon want to absolutely kill you. If the zones had more space and less Pokemon literally trying to rip your face off, then the experience would be much nicer for players and they wouldn't just want to leave the wild zones as soon as they enter them. But I also don't feel that what we've got is necessarily the worst thing imaginable either. It could be a lot better, but it's certainly not as big of a problem as people make it out to be. What's most interesting about this problem is that it's actually a discussion that the game has with itself. Characters like Ivor believe that we should tear down the wild zone barriers and let Pokemon roam, which I think many of us agree with, so the fact that the game just ends up deciding to ignore that is a shame. One of the other big criticisms I see is with the story's pacing. Personally, I kind of disagree with this. I think that while we could have seen the story be longer, utilising all 26 ranks rather than just the 10 we end up with in the game, and have a bit more variety than raise a rank of Battle 3 Rogue Mega Pokemon, maybe adding more quests with Emma, Team MZ, and other characters would have been fun. Overall, I actually think the story was quite good in ZA. I still have a lot of questions around it, and the Zero chart is rapidly changing to accommodate. The story in that game with AZ, Angie, Floette, and the characters is done really well. All of the characters feel well realised, not too one-note. Corbo and Philippe might start off seeming like intimidating monsters, but you kind of discover a kinder side to them throughout the game. I personally think that the balance is done relatively well between rogue Mega Pokemon and boss battles. In that way, it's actually quite similar to Scarlet and Violet, where often players will take on gyms, titans, and Team Star bosses interchangeably, though this being linear can make it more obvious, I suppose. I quite like the balance between taking on traditional trainer bosses and the newer, more interesting rogue Mega Pokemon battles. I think we could have done with more time with L, a bit more build up to Lysander Labs and things like that, but personally my biggest critique of the game's story is that there could just have been more. I'd have loved to see an even bigger cast with more ranks, maybe some returning characters. Even if they didn't have as big of a role in the story, it would have been nice, and it would possibly have given a bit more time to flesh out the Angie and its relation to the Ultimate Weapon, and all of that stuff that is a bit confusing and, can kind of mess with the story's pacing. Another major criticism of the game is the new battle system. Now, I was under the impression that people quite liked it. I certainly do, but I think it's more divisive than I'd like to believe. I know that a lot of people like the turn-based battle system, I really do get that, and I've enjoyed it as well, but Pokemon often struggles to do anything interesting with it in the main series games. For ZA, a game which focuses on single-player content, a unique and interesting battle system can greatly improve the gameplay if done right. Personally, I found the ZA to be more challenging, not by particularly much, but enough and more engaging than previous titles, but I understand that real-time combat isn't for everyone. I think it would have been improved if the space had been made more different. If your Pokemon was faster and followed you exactly, you'd be able to better utilise space to your advantage, which might have made the dodging and, move spacing mechanics just be a bit more well integrated, really. The final critique I want to touch on is the idea that NPCs in this game are a bit too basic and too nice. This I can definitely agree with. Outside of side quests, very few NPCs do anything at all, with none that move around the city. They all just kind of stand there. Currently, only Scarlet and Violet and X and Y have NPCs that don't do this, but it is slightly ironic that one of the other 2 times that we've seen this was 12 years ago in the very same city. The characters are all very nice and friendly, with a little confrontation with Corbo and Philippe, and sometimes Naveen, but other than that, everyone likes the player basically from word go, and they all become friends with no real tension at any point. While that is similar to many Pokemon games, few have casts that are quite this big, and the variation could have really helped the game in many ways. So is that it? Was that the hate for this game? Well, I'm sure other people have more niche problems, but those are the main commonly repeated criticisms I see on social media. Now it's time to look at some of the positives of this game. Despite the criticism, ZA was still received very well by fans and critics even more. The game currently sits at a 78 on Metacritic, with primarily positive reviews, which is fantastic to see. So what are some of its highs? First up is the new Mega design. So the Megas made the 11-year wait worth it. Mega Frostlass looks incredible, like an icy witch with a snowy veil ready to wisp you away. Mega Barbaracle completely changes up Barbaracle's vibe, and I really like this new style, with it being more graceful but just as intimidating. Mega Dragonite is beauty and grace incarnate, and my only critique is that it's not a Dragon Fairy type. Mega Chandelure adds to Chandelure's already fantastic design, making it even more opulent than before. Mega Malamar just looks fantastic and brilliant, and those are just a few of the highlights. The slate of Mega Pokemon in this game is absolutely fantastic, and it's great to see some often overlooked Pokemon get some extra attention. I seriously did not expect to see Skarmory, Drampa, Dragalge, and Phalanx to get Mega Evolutions. They were real surprises for me. Then you've got the incredible characters. All of the characters in ZA are fully realised, and while they are all a bit nice, aside from that, I really like the characters in this game. They're all full of charm and have so much more personality than the equivalent gym leaders that they take the place of. Canary and Tarragon have a great dynamic, and Canary being a gamer is a lot of fun. Ivor and Gwyn's dynamic is just as good, and Ivor being on his own just has some of the most fun characterization in a Pokemon game. The levels of brawn over brain energy rating from him are off the charts, but he's so fun and caring as well. Corbo is a very fun character with a lot of charm and a very interesting relationship with the player, seemingly taking quite a shine to them. Jacinth is of course an absolute gem, incredible writing for this character. Entirely self-obsessed, battle-loving and over-the-top levels of charm add up to make a really fun and interesting character. Grisham and Grizel are just as fun, with both being ex-Team Flare, but Grizel being more antagonistic to the player, whereas Grisham is a bit more open with you. Of course, they're not all perfect, with Grisham and Grizel especially feeling a tad underdeveloped, especially in Grisham's motivation for wanting to take Floette off of AZ, but I think that was another way that the added leg to the story could have helped. And of course you have the music. I recently picked up a CD copy of the ZA soundtrack, just because I loved it so much. It might honestly be my favourite soundtrack in the series. While it would have been nice to have more Carlos music remixed from X and Y, that wasn't ever really going to happen, but the music that we did get here is great. Jacinth's battle theme is one that has been very much loved by the fanbase, and I second that, but I actually think that all of the battle themes for the characters are great. Kanari's is good fun and fits her personality very well. Ivor's is kind of retro in some ways, and the focus on the brass is really fun. Corbeau's is just very good and intimidating, and the Team Flare Nouveau theme is a really wonderful reimagining of the original Team Flare theme. Their encounter themes are also great and fit very well with their personalities. Elle's encounter and battle themes, using cues from Lysander's theme but turn into a more hopeful, positive version, is just amazing. The Rogue Mega Battle theme is my favourite of the boss Pokemon battle themes in comparison to themes like the Terra Raid theme, Max Raid theme, and Titan Pokemon battles, with it feeling very intense and fun, and unstable as well, which is a really great representation of these Pokemon. The field music is also brilliant. Weirdly, I'm yet to find myself too bored of Lumiose City themes in this game. I like both the day and night variations, and the slight changes to the day version in the districts is really fun. And weirdly, this music is just a lot better than the ones that we had in Scarlet and Violet, which I got bored of much more quickly. It's a lot more relaxed than the X and Y version of Lumiose City's theme, which I think fits this iteration of Lumiose a lot better. The Lumiose in Crisis theme is also really, really good. The music is nerve-wracking, intense, and it really sells you on the seriousness of the situation. The Angie battle theme is purely brilliant with this very final feel to it. And then the Zygarde theme, as a complete reimagining of the Kalos Legendary Pokemon theme, is just completely brilliant. And I like how each form now has its own variation of this theme. One of ZA's many other strengths is the ZA Royale. One of the most infinitely replayable and still fun parts of a Pokemon game, in my opinion. The ZA Royale utilises the new battle system to the extreme, expecting you to sneak up on your opponents and launch into an attack before they can spot you. The mission cards and other challenges make these battles even more fun, with the reward of more battles against the characters from the main story being a lot of fun. Personally, I think the way to improve this would have been to create random trainers and teams. Just having a name generator and then give everyone 3 to 4 or Pokemon or more that they can then bring out, completely random, rather than fighting the same 30-ish trainers over and over again. I also think more of them should have used Mega Evolution, but that's just wanting slightly more challenging battles, even if it doesn't make much difference. The Royale is still a lot of fun, however, and I really do enjoy just endlessly battling trainers at night. The character customization is also much improved in ZA. While I'm still a little gutted that there aren't many options in my particular style, overall, ZA has an incredible selection of clothes, haircuts, and makeup. There's always going to be something that you like, and the addition of having multicoloured hair is amazing and makes me wish the old games had it even more. While there are some things that the other games do better, such as Sword and Shield having separate outerwear and top options rather than combined, the options in this game are just great. Let's not forget how well it utilises the open world either. Unlike in Scarlet and Violet, which saw you follow 2 simultaneous straight paths across Paldea in a zigzag fashion meeting up at Glazigado Mountain with very little backtracking, ZA instead sends you across the open Lumiose at all times. You start in the Vert District, but you quickly move into areas like the Rouge District for the Looker Bureau, the Rogue Mega Pokemon pop up all across the city, and so do the promotion matches. Vinny's in the Magenta District, Canary in the Vert District, Ivor in Jean Plaza, Corbeau in the Blur District, and Jacinthe in the Rouge District, and of course then you have Grisham in Centrico Plaza. There's all sorts to explore, and lots of nooks and crannies that you would never think to look in. Of course, you also have the sewers and Lysander Labs, which take you underground and exploring dark caverns, which is really cool. Lumiose is really well designed, and while it would be nice if it was part of a larger Carlos remake, I think it's still really well done for what it is at the minute. But now it's time for us to talk about Mega Dimension. Okay, so just first quickly, this section's title is not fantastic. It's a very niche Doctor Who reference that only will make sense to a very few thousand people, of which I expect exactly none to be in my audience. But I'm very briefly going to cover some of the critiques and positives of Mega Dimension. To avoid this literally just being a repeat of my review for the DLC, this is going to be much shorter and touch on just a few of the major topics. If you're interested to hear my full thoughts on this DLC, please go and check that video out. So, one of the biggest criticisms I have for Mega Dimension is how repetitive it is. The areas you explore are all just grayscale versions of Lumiose City from the base game. You find a few species of Pokemon to catch or a few trainers to battle, and you have to find infinite amounts of hyperspace berries just to keep playing. I personally find this to be boring and repetitive, and while you could argue the same for the ZA Royale, I think that this is much less interesting because the ZA Royale feels like you're constantly being rewarded, and I don't feel that as much with this package. Another major criticism of the DLC that I have is how time-locked everything is. While the base game runs on a 2 time state system, either day or night, each hyperspace hole is completely randomized and you only get a few minutes in each one, so you could end up just missing a shiny Pokemon or a golden bonus ball with all the best items. I think it would have been better to have longer amounts of time in each hyperspace hole, personally. The third major criticism I have of this DLC is that the story pacing was a lot less interesting this time. Unlike the base game, which had a lot more character interactions and a lot more variety, the story of the DLC is incredibly basic and repetitive. You get 25,000 hyperspace points and then you find a rogue Mega Pokemon. Rinse and repeat until Mega Darkrai. There are a few nice moments with characters like Corbeau, Karina, Ansha, and the small breaks to do multi-battles with the cast from the base game, but there's not much substance there, and there's more they could have done with this DLC's story. Not to mention the fact that in the post-game you literally just go around gathering the exact right berries to make these very specific donuts so you can go and catch the Hoenn legendaries and Zeraora. For some of the positives, the side quests are great fun, and all have a lot of personality and charm. I wish there was more variety to them, but they're all pretty fun. Then you've got the new Megas. Again, the new Megas introduced the Mega Dimension absolutely slap. The new Z-Megas are brilliant, I think they look great. Mega Baxcalibur was a much needed improvement on the original. Mega Glamora and Scovillain look brilliant. Mega Tatsugiri is really creative, Mega Meowstic is just so cute, and Darkrai and Heatran both get some love with these Megas, and they look great. You've also got both Ansha and Karina, both of whom add loads of personality and charm to this game, with Karina being a great returning character, and Ansha connecting us back to Diantha, which was really, really nice. And the interactions between them and the rest of the cast were really wonderful as well. Admittedly, the boss fights were a lot of fun as well. Mega Darkrai, the Primal Reversions, Mega Rayquaza, and Mega Zeraora are some of the most difficult and fun battles in the series. I'm almost glad we didn't get an Ultra and a Cosmo fight in the game, because I can imagine how absolutely hellish that would have been. Overall, I kind of wish that Mega Dimension had a bit more time in the oven and had been more akin to the other DLCs we've seen in the series. It could have been a much needed escape from Lumiose City, exploring more of Kalos, even if not all of it. It could have been that each of the gates led to a small Legends Arceus-like area, based on the areas from X and Y, with new story and Pokemon to find. How it would have worked I don't know, but that's for another video I guess. I wouldn't mind so much if Winds and Waves were coming this year, but with the games not coming out until next year, it feels like Mega Dimension was rushed out for no reason and could have had an extra year of development time to release later this year. So rushing it out just 2 months after ZA was incredibly insane. But now I think we should talk about what I think the real problem is with ZA and why the conversation has become so negative. And that's the price. Pokémon Legends ZA for the Nintendo Switch 2 with Mega Dimension costs £83.98. That is absolutely astronomical for what you get. Compare this to Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, which cost £81.48 with far more content, which by the way, that's with the DLC. It feels ludicrous. ZA is a phenomenal experience, but it's not worth the full price of a game like other titles in the series. That's not to say it's worse quality, in fact it's better in quality, like if you're using raw quality assurance, than Scarlet and Violet. But the scope and scale is far smaller and would have been better at a more budget-friendly price akin to the upcoming Star Fox game or Splatoon Raiders. Raiders is actually a really good comparison, as while Raiders is considered a spin-off and ZA isn't, they both do something similar to try and shake up their popular formula in a smaller package to appeal to a single-player audience. ZA is a smaller experience, no matter which way you shake it. Less Pokemon, less map, less interesting features. I don't mind the Legends series being this experimental series that's going to try a bunch of different ideas and see what works well. I actually really like that idea, but I also think it needs to be priced accordingly. Arceus was definitely worth the full price of the game, but I think ZA was overpriced considering just how much smaller in scope the game is. I think this is also partially the fault of the Nintendo Switch 2 upgrade pack, as that costs £8.99, which is ludicrous considering that it gives you exactly the same upgrades as the free patches that other games, including Scarlet and Violet, have been getting. No mouse mode, no other Switch 2 exclusive features, or anything like that. It feels incredibly cheap and calls into question why they're charging for it in the first place. I also think that Mega Dimension is highly overpriced. Considering just how little content is in the package compared to the Sword and Shield expansion pass, I think £15 would have been more reasonable. The base game itself, however, didn't need to be £50. It could have been better at just $40 or even $30. I know that in the Pokemon Company's eyes that means they're valuing it as quote-unquote worse than Scarlet and Violet, But to me, I would say that that's them pricing accordingly and could even have boosted sales as more people would have been willing to give it a try at a lower cost. Take my friend Sam. Sam has been playing Pokemon for a long time, but didn't get either Arceus or ZA because she wasn't sure if she'd like them. If ZA was cheaper, I think she'd have been far more willing to chance it. Right now, she's got my copy of Arceus because I really want her to try out both Arceus and ZA. So what? Am I saying that this would have all been sold if the game was cheaper? Well, kind of, yeah. I think at the very least people would have been a lot more forgiving if it was anyway. Not every game has to have this super high price point. Sometimes a game can just be cheaper. Your fans will thank you for it, believe me. Getting back around to the point, I think that the hate for ZA is kind of justifiable for the most part. But what I don't understand is this idea that it's the worst game in the series. Surely that title is still held by Pokémon Let's Go or BDSP. I think people need a bit of a reality check here. Expectations cause a lot of this, with a lot of people wanting more from this game, myself included, though for different reasons. I don't think anyone's wrong for being disappointed with the game, but I think that the very extreme attitudes towards this game, that was actually pretty good, is unnecessary. Let's be honest, Pokémon Legends ZA was not what it could have been. It had a lot of promise and a ton of potential, but sadly didn't achieve what it was capable of. ZA is probably the Pokemon game I have most anticipated, mainly because I spent most of last summer writing up YouTube videos for the game. I was, and still am, disappointed that it didn't live up to my expectations. But I still think it's a game with a ton of redeeming qualities and is one of my favourite games in the entire series. The real-time combat, return of Mega Evolution, the characters and the story is all good enough that I can overlook the repetitive nature of the game, and I understand that that's not the same for everyone. But like I said, I don't get the idea that the game is somehow the worst output in the series. If anyone would like to have a nice rational debate on this in the comments, I'd be more than happy to participate. I've clocked in over 100 hours in the game, and while that might seem low to some of you, the only games that I've been able to clock that much time into are the main series Pokemon games, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Age of Calamity, and Pokopia. Primarily because I just have so many things that I do with my time that I just do not have the time to just sink into one game for like 1,000 hours. I wish I did, but I just don't at all. So I think with that, it's high time that I ended this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know what you think of ZA in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be absolutely thrilled if you could hit the subscribe button, as it really helps the channel, and I'm hoping to have 1,000 subscribers by the time Winds and Waves release. Okay, with all of that being said, bye for now.